Right, folks, we have about half an hour until I need to run and get my train, and I have 11 books to talk to you about, so we're getting straight into it. I read 9 books for grown-ups. One of those was a poetry collection. We had 2 thrillers, 3 romances, like contemporary fiction, also like a modern classic. I'm going to start with probably my favorite book of the month. That's What She Said by Eleanor Pitcher. This is about 2 best friends, Serena and Beth, who have very different relationships with their dating lives, their sexual lives, their sexuality. Serena is this real like free spirit. She presents outwardly as very confident, although as with most outwardly very confident characters, there are some insecurities that confidence is overcompensating for. Meanwhile, Beth is demisexual. She's never had sex before. She needs to very intimate, emotional, personal connection with someone to feel any level of sexual feeling, and she hasn't experienced that yet, and it is becoming this kind of albatross in her life, the fact that she has never had sex with anyone. Serena and Beth kind of team up. Serena is working on an article and is using Beth essentially as the subject matter of that article, of this kind of sexual odyssey quest that she is going on. Does speed dating, sex therapy, and perhaps most entertainingly but also most impactfully, a sex tantra workshop, which both women come to with a lot of assumptions that are actually proven wrong in terms of like what this workshop, this retreat is for. And ultimately, as they go through this experiment, it starts to cause friction in their friendship, particularly because Beth is taking this really seriously. This is a really big part of her life, and it seems to be a distraction or a form of entertainment for Serena. I've not read loads of books with demisexual characters, and I do feel like there was a bit of like heavily descriptive explanation of what that is. But I was very much fine with that because there is such a lack of representation of this type of sexuality that people don't really understand it. I'm sure that is something that demisexual people experience all the time, is maybe dating someone that you do like, but they just do not understand what it means to be demi. I thought the way communication breaks down and conflict bubbles up between the 2 friends was done really authentically, and I really believed it. I really believed their friendship when we pick it up through the middle of the novel and where they end up. Again, I found the kind of wrapping up of where everyone ends up a bit kind of info dumpy for me, but nonetheless I highly recommend this. I really enjoyed it, and I also just think the type of friendship that is depicted in this book isn't something that I've really read about before, so I really loved that. So I read a few romances. Let the Games Begin by Rifaro Faith Mazarura. This is set in the Summer Olympics and it follows a male-female romance. The male is a competing athlete for Team GB, ready to go to Athens and claim the title of the fastest man on the earth. We have Olivia, who is a very ambitious, headstrong young professional who has landed an internship at the Olympic Games and really does see her future being a very high power position within the Olympics. It is something that she has dreamed about since she was very young. However, when she lands in Athens for this internship, things are not quite as she expected. Running throughout a book that is driven by a romance plot, we do have really rich character lives beyond that physical and emotional romantic connection. The home lives of both characters, the familial lives of both characters, their ambition, the pressures that they face, all inform their approach to this budding relationship between the pair of them. Bits that are about the romance, the chemistry between these 2 is perfect. As someone who has been picking up a few romance books over the past year or so that I've just thought were really mid, we'll get to one of those in a minute, this was really refreshing. I loved the Olympic Park as a setting, and also there was some very seamlessly integrated queer representation in this novel that I wasn't anticipating but was very grateful for. This is The Baby Dragon Cafe by A.T. Qureshi. This was mid, but that's fine. This is about Saphira and Aiden, and Saphira has recently undertaken her dream of opening a lovely cafe. The USP of this cafe is that owners are allowed to bring their baby dragons in. So, it's like a dog-friendly cafe, but in this fantasy world, they're dragons. Unsurprisingly, this causes lots of issues, lots of damages in the cafe. It does seem very much like she has just not thought this through. She's just had a cute idea and run with it, which is kind of, clearly what's happened with this book. Cute idea, we run with it. I feel like there's 3 or 4 books in this series now. Aiden is a local gardener who as the novel unfolds, we begin to realize it's part of a very kind of high profile like dragon family, and there is a class structure in this world where like only certain families are meant to have dragons. And he has this disobedient baby dragon that he doesn't really know how to train, doesn't really want, but Saphira seems like someone that really loves dragons, so he needs money. He wants someone to train his dragon, so that's what starts happening. But they also like fancy each other, so that kind of propels the connection between the two of them. The novel does get into that like class barrier and prejudice around what families are like worthy to have dragons, and also how families can bring a lot of prejudice to the partner that you choose. So I thought they were all like very valuable inclusions. But in terms of the writing style of this, I thought it was very heavy on telling, not showing. I feel like I would maybe like to play this book in a video game rather than read the book. Like, I had a good time. I did read it very quickly. I read most of it on a cozy reading evening. I did enjoy it. It's just like I'm not going to be thinking about it again, and I'm not going to pick up the subsequent books in the series because I feel like they will be kind of the same thing. Finally read Beach Read by Emily Henry. So this is the book that initially kind of catapulted Emily Henry to a new level of recognition, and she has since become an incredibly popular romance writer. So I have not read her books in like publication order. I've read them in a really weird order. My favorite was You, Me and Vacation, and the couple that I have read since then, I just haven't felt lived up to that experience for me, but I did really enjoy Beach Read. So this is about January and Gus, who are both authors, who are thrown together by circumstance and initially have this kind of rivalry, but eventually realize that maybe they can help each other out with their writing. They decide to do a genre swap. So January is very much a hopeless romantic. She's a romance writer, and Gus is more like serious and literary. And they decide as a writing exercise to get them both out of their writer's block. They are gonna swap genres. As they go through this experience, it brings up a lot of conversations around their life experiences, their approaches to love, their approaches to life. It is also charged by this competitiveness because they are in a race to get their next book published. Of course, that kind of intimate sharing of lives and the competitive element leads to a lot of chemistry. Overall, I thought it was a lot of fun. I find that romance books that heavily feature books as a theme go one of two ways for me. I can either like really enjoy them or find them quite irritating, and in this case I did really enjoy it. I haven't read Emily Henry's latest novel yet, so when I do, I feel like I should do a tier ranking of how I feel about all of them. I read Comedic Timing by Upsana Barath. This is published by 831 Stories or 831 Stories. I'm not sure how you're meant to say it. They're quickly becoming like one of my favorite publishers. So they publish all of their books in this cover style, but with different like color palettes. They are all romance stories, but in terms of the quality of the writing, it is a very like high quality writing. They are typically like not too long. They're typically quite slim. Do you find in maybe like traditional romance stories, there is a lot of like filler, and that is really removed in these books, which I really love. Our main character has moved to New York City to get a fresh start. She is in her mid-20s. She now has like a steady, committed job. She has just left her long-term girlfriend. It was like quite intense. She was older than she was, and she's very committed to like the hustle of her career. I love New York as a setting for books, so I really appreciated and enjoyed that. However, when she arrives in New York, she doesn't kind of settle in as swimmingly as she expected to. When she meets David, who is an aspiring filmmaker, things start to feel a lot more settled, and in many ways, he starts to feel like home for her. Connection between the pair of them is growing and building, and it's leading to a lot of confusion for her because she thought she only liked women. I really loved that exploration of her sexuality because I feel like bisexuality is often presented through a lens for women where they have dated men for a really long time and then they realize they like a woman. And I liked how this wasn't that, it was different, and that is an authentic experience that people have. I thought the novel really captured the messiness of the transition between friends to more. You can read these books like cover to cover in one sitting. I read it like in the morning before my partner woke up. It made me feel very smug when he woke up and I could say I've read a whole novel this morning. I'm hoping to make my way through all of their publications this year. I really love them. So I read 2 Frida McFaddens this month. I read The Inmate. So in this one we are following a nurse practitioner and her new job at a high security men's prison. Turns out she has a connection with one of the resident inmates. He has a notoriously dangerous reputation within the prison, But nobody knows that Brooke and Shane actually dated in high school, and she is part of the reason that he was sent to prison. It was her testimony that sent him there. And over the course of the novel and through different perspectives and lens, we are building up a picture of what happened on the night that he allegedly committed a series of very brutal murders. Throughout the book, we are not sure whose perspective we are supposed to believe, and we are piecing it together. After I read a few Frida McFadden books, I started to see like kind of a pattern on what the big reveal was going to be and how she like misdirects you to try and make you not figure it out. And I found myself really frustrated with this book because I was consciously looking for that and I still looked in just slightly the wrong place. There isn't too much more to say about this one, nor the next one that I'm going to talk about, because I feel like you know what you're going to get with Frida McFadden books, and you either like embrace them and enjoy them for what they are, or they're just not interesting to you. But for me, this was very much like a read in one sitting, compulsive page-turning read. And so was The Perfect Son. This one we are following Erica Cass, who is the mother of 2 teenage children. Her youngest, her daughter, is someone that she ends up having kind of a lot of frustrations with, as I think often happens in mother-daughter relationships as they go through adolescence. Meanwhile, her son, who is the elder child, he can do no wrong. He is absolutely perfect. She openly says that she might have a favorite kid. However, beneath that, she has this incredible uneasiness about him. Even though she loves him and thinks he's precious, she has so much kind of suspicion around him that amplifies throughout the book, particularly when a teenage girl in the area ends up going missing. And all of the suspicion seems to be pointing towards her son. And the evidence is starting to stack up. We follow throughout the book how Erica is essentially trying to protect her son from himself and the potential for danger and evil that she sees within him. In terms of the grand reveal of this one, I had been looking in multiple places, and the reveal was one of the places I was looking, but I was never like fully committed to what I thought was going on. Had the same experience with this as I've had with The Inmate and all of Frida's other books that I've read. Cover to cover, one sitting. Had a very entertaining time. I also read Orlando by Virginia Woolf. Oh, how do I feel about this book? This is a novel that takes place over the course of 300 years, and you kind of just have to get on board with that and suspend your disbelief with the liberal use of how time works that features in this novel. We begin with a young man in the court of Queen Elizabeth I. We're following along with his life. He falls in love, has his heart broken, then time skips forward, and also Orlando's gender then changes. Orlando becomes a woman. We then follow her life in Constantinople, so that is Istanbul in modern day. Time moves forward again. Orlando moves back to England, gets all of their possessions back because people assumed that Orlando had died because a reasonable amount of time had passed for people to anticipate that someone has died. And everything around Orlando's longevity of life, but also their change in gender and sex, is accepted. It's taken at face value. It is suggested that Orlando's sex organs do change in this transformation. However, there is exploration around whether that actually does fundamentally change anything about Orlando's life and sense of self or not, and whether it is actually just how we project gender onto bodies. So are they actually treated differently and feel differently purely because of the clothes they put on and the perceptions that people bring to them? I thought that was really interesting, and I can see why this is a seminal text in exploring ideas of gender and sexuality changing, shifting. I can see why this is a text that is very important and is studied. Did I find it like an entertaining reading experience? Less so. This is also a book that explores writing and explores literature. It frames itself as an actual biography of someone that existed. But also throughout the course of the book, Orlando is writing this epic poem that is with them throughout the course of the entire 300-year span of the book. It's also a book that kind of criticizes the writing style of the time. In the third kind of portion of the novel, when Orlando returns to England, they are spending a lot of time with writers and poets, and there seems to be a lot of criticism towards those people and how they are writing, the overly complicated way in which they are writing. In fact, when I was reading this book, and this maybe just demonstrates how writing styles have changed, I found it quite difficult. Now, perhaps that is because I was reading it on a plane, and this is simply not a plane read. It is a book that you really should sit down with and really digest. I am glad I read it. I see a lot of value in it. I see why it is so widely studied and respected. I just wasn't necessarily entertained by it. Okay, my alarm has just gone off to say that I need to leave, so we do need to get through these next books quite quickly. So I read Goonie by Michael Mullen. This is a poetry collection. It's a book that explores queerness, that explores Scottishness, both things that I loved exploring. What I really appreciated is the use of Scots throughout the poem, so a version of language that is, you know, a Scots dialect. I love when poems are really heavily like emphasized on sound and also how people's accents are, so I really loved that. And it did mean at times that I really had to slow down with the collection, maybe even sometimes try and say things out loud to fully grasp what the dialect meant, and I really enjoyed that. I love when writers bring their culture and their language and their background to their writing like that. It's a book that is like very Glaswegian. The poems have anger in them in places. There's a very raw honesty in them in places. I really enjoyed reading this one. I read a young adult book. This is I Can't Even Think Straight by Dean Atta. This is about the friendship between Kai and Matt, who are both gay teenage boys who have kind of vowed to each other that they are going to remain in the closet together, although one of them is more keen on doing that than the other. Matt really wants to stay in the closet, Kai less so, but when Kai is put on the spot by their group of friends, he ends up saying, yes, I am gay, and that leads to a rift in their friendship because they thought they were in it together. In a few of Dean Atta's books, he has explored this idea of the friction that can come in gay friendships or relationships when one person is more comfortable with their sexuality than the other. And I think exploring that in adolescence is a really interesting point in someone's life and someone's journey to explore that, because people are at very different stages. I also liked how the book explored their differing familial situations and how that impacts their relationship with their sexuality. I also really loved the crowd of like guy mates that these guys had. I think it was really well done and showed that there can be homophobic attitudes that bubble up in groups of men, but it also brilliantly highlighted that there are so many great young men that do not care about the sexuality of their mates. They just care about their mates. As with all of Dean Atta's young adult books that I have read, this is told in verse, which I always really love. It makes them a really quick read. This is another one I read cover to cover in one sitting, and I do find that verse format adds a real intimacy of feeling to the characters. Like, you are very much in their head, which I think works so well for novels that are exploring themes of sexuality. And then finally, a book for middle grade readers. I read The Last Bard by Maz Evans. I loved this so much. I got on with this so well. This is about Will, who, when his grandfather passes away, he inherits this copy of the complete works of Shakespeare, and he ends up realizing that he is actually the last living descendant of William Shakespeare himself, and he actually has this power to bring Shakespearean characters off the page and into the world. That was so entertaining. As someone that really loves Shakespeare, who is making a conscious effort to consume more Shakespeare specifically this year, I loved that so much. And I also loved that this is an introduction to Shakespeare at a much younger age than would typically happen. I do think when kids get to secondary school and they really struggle with Shakespeare, and there's this idea that like Shakespeare shouldn't be on like secondary school curriculums anymore, it's not relevant, it's stuffy, they don't understand it. I think that is purely an exposure issue. I think with books like this, where Shakespearean characters are being introduced at an earlier age, that remedies so much of that. I firmly believe there is so much value that we can get from Shakespeare, that today's teenagers can get from Shakespeare. And it really cleverly introduces this idea of, if you don't fully understand everything that is being said, if you don't fully understand the definition of every word that you hear, that does not mean that you don't know what's going on. There's also a very emotional, heartbreaking story that comes to the forefront of this book that did make me tear up on the train when I was reading it. Although I say I was reading it, I was actually listening to it on audiobook, which was brilliant. I then went for lunch with my friend, and I ended up mentioning that I was listening to the audiobook on the train, and then she was like, oh my God, pulled up her library app, and she was also listening to this audiobook. That was an incredibly fun moment. I've not given myself enough time to tell you about how much I loved this book, but I did really love it. Okay, I really need to go. I don't have time to do a sign off. If you want to let me know you're here and you don't have anything in particular to say, just leave me the stack of books. Right, I need to go. I will speak to you in my next video.